But if they fall, if Hurts doesn't improve, or the improvements are only, like you just make small improvements, then I think they're going to aggressively seek to either draft a quarterback in the 2023 draft, where the class is projected to be far better than it was in 2022. And I guess we'll have to see, which veterans become unhappy with their teams next offseason, as seems to be the recent trend in the NFL.
Appreciate you streaming on in to Birds 365 with McMullen and McDonald. We got one of our favorite guests to join us this morning from PhillyVoice.com, Jimmy Kempski, who just wrapped up his dumpster fire off-season column of the National League East. One of the things I look most forward to during the off-season. So, JK, first and foremost, thanks for coming on. Good job on the dumpster fire. We're surely going to get to it. But I got to get you to weigh in first. The thing that McMullen and I have been kicking around for 2 days now, actually for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months now, but we've gotten a little more formalized the last couple of days. If I give you these three options, one of these three things has to happen with the Eagles. The Eagles have to be in this position 10 months from now. Either Jalen Hurts will be the starting quarterback of the Eagles with a nice $100 million+ contract extension in his back pocket. The Eagles will have decided, Jalen's not a franchise quarterback, and they'll go out and do what they have to do to get a different quarterback to be their quarterback going forward. Or Jalen's still here, and he's on the 4th year of his contract, and it's kind of a make-good year for him. Which of those three scenarios is most likely, in your opinion?
I think number 2 is the most likely. They already tried to, just look at what they did this offseason. They tried to get Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson, and that never really left the ground because neither guy wanted to play for Philly. Yeah. And if the 2022 draft had better quarterbacks available, then I think the Eagles would have been aggressive in trying to get one. But as we saw, one quarterback got drafted in the first 2 rounds, like not even that round one. First 2 rounds, one guy went. And of course, that was Kenny Pickett to the Steelers. So if you liked Kenny Pickett, then maybe you take him with one of your 3 first-round picks. Evidently, they didn't. So they didn't take him. So, I think they're going to ride with Hurts. Well, not I think. Obviously, they're going to ride with Hurts in 2022 when 2023 comes around. And obviously, we got to see how Jalen plays during the 2022 season. If they have a run in the playoffs and, the contract extension makes sense, then, certainly they'll do that. But if they fall, if Hurts doesn't improve, or the improvements are only, like you just make small improvements, then I think they're going to aggressively seek to either draft a quarterback in the 2023 draft, where the class is projected to be far better than it was in 2022. And I guess we'll have to see, which veterans become unhappy with their teams next offseason, as it seems to be the recent trend in the NFL. And I think they'll explore trade opportunities if they're available as well. But again, we got to see how he plays.
Yeah, right. And you brought up in your Eagles dumpster fire piece, and Jimmy, does every team in the NFC East, so he doesn't give a pass to the home team. There is this sort of group, and I agree with you. Like, we don't think about what if Jalen Hurts gets worse as a quarterback. And to his credit, it hasn't happened yet. He's gotten incrementally better throughout his career, but that's kind of rare. You usually have these ebbs and flows. I think if he does get worse, I think it's an easy decision.
Oh, no brainer. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the argument behind him potentially declining is, you look at the end of the year last year, the Giants had a plan for him, and he really struggled against them, especially in the one game. The other game, he was a little better. And then the Buccaneers, they had a plan for him, and the passing offense didn't even look functional in that game. So the other 2 late games that year were both against Washington. And, I don't know if you just throw those out because they had 15 guys on COVID, but certainly they weren't up to full strength in those games. So it would have been nice to see, him play against I guess, better.
By the way, I love the Zoolander reference. I try to get a Zoolander reference in every year during the coaching cycle. I give a Mugatu reference because he's the hot candidate. He's the handsome candidate.
So hot right now.
Can't go left. The ambi turner, Jalen Hurts.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, one of the I guess deficiencies in his game last year was if you kept him in the pocket, or you at least didn't let him leak out to the right side. This is what the Buccaneers did to him in that playoff game. If he was going to escape the pocket, make sure he goes to the left and make him, go that way. He's not as comfortable throwing to that side of the field, first of all, either from the pocket or on the run, but certainly on the run, he's not as comfortable going that way. So it's, he's going to have, the teams are going to have a year of film and tendencies on him, and he's going to have to adjust. And I don't think I don't think it's set in stone that he's going to improve. I think he will. I think he will improve in 2022, but I don't think it's a certainty that he will.
Jimmy, one of the things you have in your Eagle Dumpster Fire column on phillyvoice.com today that I do have to disagree with is last year, the Eagles had an advantage over a lot of teams they played because the other teams were tremendously hurt, if not completely crippled by injury. Yet the Eagles were as healthy as God could ever want. Well, that's going to happen again this year because the Eagles have figured it out. Don't practice, you don't get hurt. That's the key to staying healthy is don't practice, and you'll be perfectly fine. And they're planning on doing the exact same thing this year.
Yeah, the point that you make there is, I mean, they had Brandon Graham and they lost Brandon Brooks, of course, and those were the two big losses for them last year. And you look at some of the teams they played, like the Saints, for example, they didn't have Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, both are starting like great offensive tackles in Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk. They didn't have their one. I don't know if he played left guard or right guard, but Andrews Pete was missing that game. Starting quarterback Jameis Winston was out. They started Trevor Siemian in that game. Like that, you're talking about 4 or 5 Pro Bowl players that were out of that game. Then, as I mentioned earlier, you had the 2 Washington games. Those Washington teams were totally depleted against and then, of course, you're facing a combination of Mike Glennon and Jake Fromm in one of those Giants games. So, yeah, I mean, the Eagles had good injury health, and the opponents that they faced generally did not. I do think there is something to the idea that they were, maybe a little healthier because they had a weaker training camp, or not weaker, but like a less active training camp. I do think there is something to that. Of course, the flip side of that is how and this is of course very difficult to quantify, but what did they lose on the field because they had shorter practices and they had less physical practices? I think one thing that you can maybe point to is early in the season they were on a pace to break like the all-time NFL record for penalties in a season. And that got cleaned up as the season went along. But early in the season, that was a major problem for this team. I don't know if you can equate that to, shorter training camp practices or whatever. But it is sort of like an interesting debate on whether to go hard or not in training camp. But I do actually think there was something to, not the whole thing, obviously, but there was something to them staying a little healthier than they might have otherwise if they hadn't had a.
Well, they certainly think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the organization does. And I don't know, from my perspective, I think it's a little bit haughty to think that we're ahead of everybody as far as limiting injuries. Chip Kelly was here. The sports science of the Eagles were sort of the ground floor of all of this. And they kept a lot of that when Chip left, but they had a lot of old players as they got successful, and they had a lot of injuries. Doesn't come down because if you think about Brandon Graham, as you mentioned, Brandon Brooks, Isaac Seumalo, what do they have in common? They're veteran players who played a lot of football. Don't older people just get injured? I know I do. I might get up out of this chair this morning and pull a hamstring. Isn't that just natural?
I have like I have to do 2 months of rehab for freaking tennis elbow. I've never played a match. I've never played a tennis match in my life, but yeah, certainly the more you age, the more susceptible you are to injury, like no question about it. And I think the roster has maybe got, I'd have to take a look, but I think it actually kind of has maybe gotten a little bit younger the last couple of years. They had those 2 straight years where they only made 5 draft picks. They made 10 draft picks overall. What was that? 2018 and 2019. That's right. Okay,
yeah,
so yeah, I mean they've had these. They I think that hurt them in terms of sort of reloading the roster with younger players and sort of filling the pipeline of young players coming up. But more recently, they've had more draft picks, of course. 2022 notwithstanding, they only made 5 picks this year, of course. But yeah, I mean that certainly factors in as well. And by the way, this trend of these shorter training camp practices or less physical training camp practices, even in OTAs and mini camp during the spring and summer, that's sort of been a league-wide trend.
Sure.
I mean, the Eagles and Bengals were the only teams that just skipped mini camp altogether. But I think for the most part around the NFL, they did go lighter across the board.
Because the players negotiated it into the collective bargaining agreement. That's all they ever win. They don't actually get any more money from the owners. They just get less practice time. I got to love your 10th and final Eagle dumpster fire note today. And I'm guessing that it's a late ad. The 2022 Eagles have some dream team vibes. Yeah. Well, that's Miles Sanders opening the door for Kempski to walk through this week by calling the Eagles an all-star team. Been there, done that. I guess Miles wasn't paying attention during the dream team era of the Philadelphia
Eagles. He's 14. I looked it up. Miles was 14 when Vince Young was popping up.
Wasn't in high school yet, so he wasn't paying attention, so we'll cut him a little slack. Not exactly the same. I think part of the dream team problem was when Vince Young went there, Vince Young was counting on Vince Young, and Vince Young wasn't a player at that time. Miles could actually almost get away with saying it does make it right, but he can because he's going to be the Eagles' lead back. Give us the history lesson, Jimmy. How detrimental do you think that quote was? Is this year's Miles Sanders quote really along those lines?
And Jimmy, while you were gone there, we were talking about getting to 10 when you do this dumpster fire series. I imagine it was pretty easy with the Commanders. In fact, you probably didn't even have to go on the field at all if you didn't want to with the Commanders. Probably easy with the Giants. With the Eagles, you had to go to the punter and the dream team stuff. Is that a good sign that you struggle to get to 10?
Yeah, it was hard going through the roster and picking out roster holes. I mean, I found safety, quarterback, and punter. So, you're right. It was hard. I had to come up with sort of reasons other than just, the actual players on the team. Am I breaking up again here?
We'll tell you when you do. You're not 100%, but we'll continue on until we get here. What you have to say. Wait, what do you mean safety? You're not a part of the Whiskey Tart fan club?
No, we got some, Jimmy.
We got some guys who think that he's going to make the Pro Bowl this year with the Eagles.
One of the best coverage safeties in football. Which is strange that it was on the market June 17th, but the whole league got it wrong.
Yeah, do we know what he signed for, by the way, yet? I hadn't.
Not yet. No.
It won't be more than $2 million, I imagine.
No. I did hear he got a little over the veteran minimum, so whatever that would be, probably about $2 million.
Makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, their safeties are going to be Anthony Harris and Marcus Epps more than likely as the starters. And if they play these soft shell defenses like they did last year, then those guys will be protected. But the bigger problem would be if they continue to play these soft shell defenses. So it's not great if they have to protect these safeties. And I don't know. It's a small roster hole in my opinion. I think they're at least competent. They're not going to be horrible, but it's certainly not a strength of the team. And you're right. I sort of ran out of position groups to pick on, so I had to go to the punter with my 9-3s. And you're right about these other teams in the NFC East. I actually didn't have a problem getting to 10 for the Cowboys. I didn't have a problem getting to 10 for the Giants. Certainly, Commanders was actually a little harder than those other two.
Really?
But actually, I think their roster is okay.
Talent-wise, they're not bad. But I think if you go off the field, you can get to 10 pretty easily.
Yeah, they gave me fodder for two, reasons with Jack Del Rio and Dan Snyder, of course. But then once you exhaust those, you got to find 8 more. So you can pick on Carson Wentz. I can pick on their linebackers. You can pick on some little things here and there, wide receiver depth, their corner safety, but it's it's a roster that's really not that bad. I think they'll be more competitive this year than they were a year ago, especially, I mean, at the end of the year, they got killed by COVID and a lot of other injuries. J.C. Young and Logan Thomas might not be ready for the start of the season. But yeah, Dallas was the one that was surprising to me because I really didn't have a problem getting to 10 for them at all. Like theirs was actually the easiest one to write. If you know, I mean, the Giants, I guess, was really easy too. But of the teams that actually have some talent, like the Cowboys were the easiest one for me to do between them, the Commanders, and the Eagles.
The Commanders could have gone best 2 out of 3 falls on the sideline between their defensive linemen actually fighting each other. That's
right.
Not really a good thing for a team in season. All right, back to the Eagles again, and not just the dumpster fire, but making projections for this upcoming season. Of the linebackers Eagle have, and we're not even going to consider Hassan Reddick a linebacker, even though he's going to be playing some there, depending on how you situate your defense and what you designate people as. But we'll keep him as a defensive end, not a linebacker. How do you think the play between Dean and White and Edwards is going to shake out? Amount of snaps on the field, amount of volume. Put them in the order do you think they'll play the most this year? Edwards, Dean, White. How do you think their snaps break out?
So I don't remember if this was on the record or off the record. So I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but let's just go for it. What the hell? They're cross-training Dean at both linebacker spots. So both at the Mike and the Will. So he's going to be able to play either spot. We asked, like, is that going to be difficult for him? And he's like, no, that guy is smart as hell. He's going to learn. He's going to pick up both positions like that. In fact, Georgia does more on their defense than we do on our defense. So he said he didn't have any issues with. I mean, we're talking about what was he, a mechanical engineer with like a 3.5 or 3.6 GPA at Georgia, Nakobe Dean. So he's going to pick up the offense and he'll be fine. I would imagine that TJ Edwards will primarily play the Mike position, and Kaiser White will primarily play the Will position. And I think all three of those guys are going to get playing time. So I don't necessarily know that, you can just take two guys and say, okay, those two guys are going to be the starters. We'll see how it plays out in training camp. I will say that, obviously the Eagles over the last 5-6 years, they seem to sign a linebacker in free agency every year who just doesn't pan out. They cut him during camp. They cut him during the season, whatever it may be. So we'll see how Kaiser White plays this year, and we'll see how Nakobe Dean is as a reason, it doesn't pan out. Then they still have TJ Edwards, who was by far the Eagles' best linebacker in 2021 and is at least a competent player.
Yeah, I think he's the most underrated player on the Eagles, TJ Edwards. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, coming off the last season. We'll see, you got to get better. You can't stand still, but I think he surprised a lot of people. I do want to rewind to what you said about the Cowboys and it being a little bit easier than you thought.
Yeah.
They strike me as a very top-heavy team, a lot of top-tier talent, a lot of stars. But once you get past that, is that what you kind of found with the Cowboys?
100%. Like you look at the rosters that they had, around 2010 with that basic time frame with DeMarcus Ware and Tony Romo and Dez Bryant. You had a lot of star players at the top, and then beyond them, just average starters, not a lot of depth. And I kind of view their roster that way now too, because you have star power in Michael Parsons and Trayvon Diggs. If you want to put Dak Prescott in there, fine. CeeDee Lamb is an emerging player, potential star. But beyond those guys, and Zach Martin on the offensive line is another one too. Beyond those guys, there's not really much compelling about that team. The two major strengths that we associate with the Dallas Cowboys have for a while is the offensive line. And I think that particular area of the team is very much on the decline. Tyron Smith can't stay healthy. They draft this kid out of Tulsa who is never, he hasn't played guard since high school. So they're going to play him at guard, and he's their left guard of the present, left tackle of the future. So he's going to play left guard. It's a new position that he has to learn. If at some point, not if, but when Tyron Smith goes down inevitably at some point this year. Are they going to kick that rookie back out to left tackle after he's been repping at guard all offseason? So, like, that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. They lose La'el Collins during the offseason. They lose Connor Williams during the offseason. So they've lost players. They have one guy that's he's like late stage Jason Peters, career at this point in Tyron Smith. And then the other positional group that, we associate with Dallas being really strong is wide receiver over the last few years. I mean, last year, heading into the season, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. If you want to throw Cedric Wilson, maybe not at the beginning of the season. We weren't thinking of him this way, but he had a good season last year.
Yeah.
Got paid in free agency. That was a very scary group. This year, Cooper's gone. You have CeeDee Lamb still. Michael Gallup is coming back from an ACL tear, but he may not be ready for the start of the season. Whenever he is ready, he may not be 100%. They draft Jalen Tolbert in the third round. I guess they signed James Washington from the Steelers. Never really did much there for them. But, I mean, you look at them last year and you go, ooh, that's a scary group. This year you go, okay, well, that guy's good. But other than him, not really all that scary. So, like, those are the two major areas. And you look at, like, the Eagles situation with Jalen Hurts. He's sort of the unproven guy, but everything's there for him. He's got the receivers. He's got the tight end. He's got the offensive line. It's sort of the opposite for Dak, where he's the established guy. But now for the first time in his career, he doesn't have a great cast around him because the offensive line is sort of falling apart. The wide receivers aren't as scary as they used to be. Zeke Elliott is certainly not the player that he was in his first 3-4 years in the league. So I think it's the contrast between the Eagles and Cowboys is interesting from that perspective.
1 point, and then one more Cowboy question for you. If Zeke Elliott has the season I think he's going to have, Jerry Jones will never pay another running back again. He did it with Emmitt Smith. He did it begrudgingly with Zeke. And, yeah, I think it's going in the opposite direction real fast with him. So Jerry will never pay a running back again. One of the favorite things in your Cowboy one, that the takeaway regression is coming.
Yeah.
Analytics say you are 100% dead on right. Quick explanation of that for our listeners.
Yeah, so they had 34 takeaways a season ago that led the NFL. Trayvon Diggs had 11 interceptions a year ago. He's not getting 11 interceptions again in 2022. The Cowboys almost certainly aren't going to take the ball away 34 times again like they did last year. So what I did was I looked at all the teams. I think it was since 2016, whatever gave me a big enough sample size to kind of go off of. I looked at all the teams that had at least 30 takeaways in a season. And on average, first of all, there's, I want to say I had like 15 to 20 of them on there. Every single one of them had regression on that front the following year. And on average, those teams had, like, I think it was like 9 or 10 fewer takeaways the following year than they had, when they had 30 plus turnovers. They also had 6 defensive touchdowns last year. That doesn't happen all that often. That's not gonna happen again, more than likely in 2022. So you're gonna see some regression from Diggs in terms of his personal, productivity in terms of just taking the ball away. 11 interceptions is a crazy number of interceptions to have in a season. First of all, quarterbacks are just going to stop throwing at them. But even if they don't, it's just so hard to match. But their total takeaways are going to come down, and then obviously their huge plays, the defensive touchdowns are also going to come down as well. I mean, that's almost like a stone cold lock that they're going to, have some regression in those 3 areas.
At Jimmy Kempski on Twitter, you can read his entire Dumpster Buyer series at phillyboys.com. And I guess we'll end with the New York Giants because it's the one team we haven't delved into. Right. So let's talk medium Pepsis and, knocked over trash cans. Isn't it amazing how the Giants were one of those franchises that were so sort of steady and consistent for years and years and years? Like him or hate him, most people in Philadelphia hate him for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Well-respected organization. They've done a 180 since Jerry Reese pretty much got fired.
Yeah.
And they moved on from the Tom Coughlin era. It's been every coach, every 2 years, a change at coach. We know Dave Gettleman, disaster GM. You started with the owner. That's a bit of a surprise with the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, he's the constant there. I mean, you mentioned they change over the coaching staff every couple years. I mean, we're talking about Ben McAdoo. Pat Shurmur was Why would you hire Pat Shurmur? That is crazy. Why? What did he bring to the table? Now you're bringing in Brian Dable. They hope he can turn it around. Gettleman, I don't know how they kept him in place as long as they did. Okay, admit the mistake and replace him already. I mean, he was there like 4 years. It's crazy that he lasted that long. So I look at them, and they and the Jets are tied for the worst record in the NFL over the last 5 years.
That's amazing. New York football. Jody's got to go on WFAN with that New York football. Wow.
Yeah, here's the good news. If I'm going on FAN now, the Mets and the Yankees are two of the best teams in baseball. Yeah. You don't need to talk about
it's a baseball town. It's the only town left. It's a baseball town. That's why.
But in writing theirs, it was fun recapping everything that happened to them during the 2021 season. I mean, I can't recall just as disastrous of a season as they had last year. So, preseason, you have Jason Garrett saying, "Call me coach" to the media. You have week 1, Joe Judge tries to challenge a non-challengeable play on a touchdown. Week 2, they have the play where Dexter Lawrence jumps off sides on the field goal. They get Washington gets the re-kick and they make it and they lose like an instant classic, just wreck, just ruin a win. You have the free, medium Pepsi. That's at the end of the year, by the way. They had Fan Appreciation Day when the team was like 4-10 and they get a free medium Pepsi. Then people get to the stadium.
You couldn't even get it. Yeah.
And they're told that it's one free medium Pepsi per account holder for season tickets. So if a season ticket holder has 4 tickets, you only get one medium Pepsi. So but all that going on, you have Joe Judge at the end of the year after a bad Bears loss. I think they had like -10 passing yards in one game against the Bears. After that game, he had this long rant. He says, "This ain't no clown show." And then, week 18, they what happened? The double QB sneak from within their own 5-yard line. When
I get room to punt, is that room to punt?
He felt they needed room to punt. So they ran QB sneaks on 2nd and 3rd down, and they were just destroyed on social media after they did that. Like, nobody was paying attention to that game because it's Washington and New York has it's only for draft position at that point. And somehow that game became interesting just because of those 2 QB sneaks. So, I mean, just from start to finish, their season last year was an absolute disaster. By the end of the year, I thought they were the worst team in the NFL.
And don't forget Joe Judge saying everybody wants to play for me as well.
That's right. That's right.
Here's now I'm going to here comes the ire on the stream here.
Yeah.
They lost their last how many games in a row? Giants 5, 6.
I'd have to look it up.
I don't know.
I think they lost their last 6 games and they got they played Tampa and got crushed by Tampa. Their only win in their last 8 games.
Well, that's true.
Was against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Right.
And Jalen Hurts played the worst game of his career. So as big a dumpster fire as the Giants were. Oh, and they were. They did find a way.
That's true. That was the worst game.
Their season went down the toilet bowl.
Yeah, what was that game? 13-7, I think.
Yeah. 13, but 13, you know what? The Eagles should have won it.
For the agent. Didn't send that tape off the Canton afterwards. I can guarantee you that.
If Jalen Reagor caught the football. Yeah.
And Boston Scott had a bad fumble, I think, in that game.
Yeah.
But
they still should have won the game as bad as Jalen played.
That's right.
The one thing I gave Jalen Reagor credit for was he came out and talked to us after that game, Jimmy. And he doesn't have to in the COVID era. So he gave him credit for accountability. But boy, that was a stinker. That was a stinker. No doubt about it.
JK, we appreciate your dumpster fire series. And just quickly, I think you and I have done this on the air before, BDR, WIP. The first time I ever saw one of them, I said, holy mackerel, Kempski's in a bad mood. He's just killing this team. They're not as bad. The whole dumpster fire aspect of it went completely over my head.
That's funny.
So that's shame on me because I thought, Jesus, I like Jimmy, but he's being heavy-handed on one side here. What the hell is he doing? And then I kind of figured it out. But
it's just an exercise in pointing out every flaw I can find.
Yeah.
You do a great job with it. It's one of the best things during the offseason. Glad to get you on this week when you wrapped it up. We're going to be getting you on plenty as the season arrives. Thanks much for jumping in this morning.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.